The original Superman serial from 1948 was a successful hit, paving the way for Columbia and Sam Katzman to create a sequel, Atom Man vs. Superman. Welcome to the summer of Superman, and I hope you can join me on this journey through Superman's theatrical roller coaster ride. In the previous video, I discussed the 1948 Superman serial, and now we get to tackle the sequel to the original Superman, the original Super sequel. Columbia and Sam Katzman had success with the 1948 Superman serial, and since then, they had gone on to create a sequel to their 1943 serial in 1949 with Batman and Robin. And a funny thing about Batman and Robin from 1949 is it features the first live-action appearance of Commissioner Gordon. And Commissioner Gordon in 1949's Batman and Robin was played by Lyle Talbot. And the serial we're discussing today features the first live-action appearance of Lex Luthor. Although back then he didn't have Lex yet, he was just known as Luthor. And Luthor is being played also by Lyle Talbot. So one fun trivia fact is Lyle Talbot portrayed both the first theatrical live-action Commissioner Gordon as well as the first live-action Lex Luthor. Lyle Talbot was also in the Vigilante Fighting Hero of the West serial, which is based on the Greg Saunders version of the Vigilante character in DC Comics. So Lyle Talbot is no stranger to these DC Comics-based serials. And honestly, I thought Lyle Talbot's Luthor was one of the brightest spots in this serial. Luthor at this time was still more of a one-dimensional, mad scientist-esque villain. This version does attempt to add some more depth to him, but ultimately it's still kind of just a mad scientist. But that was the Luthor of the time, and so I did feel like it was a generally faithful adaptation of the Luthor and even of Superman that we had at the time. And I really appreciated that aspect. It gives it a little charm. As for the rest of the cast, Pierre Watkin and Tommy Bond returned to play Perry White and Jimmy Olsen, respectively. You get the late, great Noelle Neal returning as Lois Lane, and later she would go on in Season 2 of Adventures of Superman to go on and play Lois Lane again for another Superman in George Reeves. And like the previous one, Noelle Neal was a great addition and one of the brighter spots as well, along with Lyle Talbot's Luthor. In terms of Superman, you have Kirk Alyn returning, and I thought Kirk Alyn did a pretty good job in the first one. He wasn't the best, but he was far from the worst, and I genuinely enjoyed his portrayal of Superman. And I still enjoy his portrayal of Superman in this version, however, not as much. It gets a lot more of the quirky and like winking at the camera side of things, especially when it gets into some plot lines about like Lois questioning whether Clark and Superman are the same person. And also, just as a side note, much like the first serial, Superman is listed as a separate cast member here. So on the marquee, Kirk Alyn is listed as Clark Kent's actor, whereas Superman is listed as a cast member because Superman is played by Superman. Now on to the serial itself. Compared to the first one, this one is a lot more gimmicky. It's harder to follow, mainly because the plot and story kind of just gets lost through the episodic storytelling because they just have a lot of gimmicks and whatnot and just different like powers and machines that can do different things to Superman and people. And so just everything feels ultra episodic in a way, whereas like the first one, it felt episodic in the sense it was like every 3 or 4 chapters, whereas this one, it's like every chapter itself. Right off the bat in the first chapter, you get Superman stopping Luthor from destroying a bridge, and Luthor goes to prison, and you get a time jump. You get a 1 year time jump, but it's never like shown or displayed or talked about on screen. You just get a 1 year time jump. And so there's just stuff like that where it's never clear how much time is actually passing. That does make it sometimes harder to follow, but that's primarily only in the first chapter. The rest of the serial becomes harder to follow for other reasons. And that's because the plot as a whole is all over the place in Atom Man vs. Superman. Whereas in the first one in 1948, it was pretty straightforward. You had the first chapter, which was Superman's origin. But after that, it's pretty much just the Spider Lady tries to get this reducer ray. And then she has to try and get kryptonite so she can prevent Superman from stopping her evil plan. And then Superman has to stop her from using the reducer ray, even though she has kryptonite. And you just have to, it's pretty straightforward. Stopping the Spider Lady from using the reducer ray. However, in Atom Man vs. Superman, in the first chapter alone, you had Superman stopping Luthor from destroying a bridge and getting thrown in prison. And then a year later, Luthor gets released on parole because he's helping out with a government project.
There's a woman driving under the bridge. She must have gotten past the police.
Typical woman driver.
And then after that first chapter, you have criminals disappearing out of thin air. You have Luthor adopting the Atom Man persona. And then you go to people getting teleported into the empty doom. And then you get Superman getting teleported into the empty doom. And then you get a ghost Superman. And then you get Superman using his X-ray vision, which conveniently turns a box of nails into plutonium, to Luthor inventing synthetic kryptonite, to Luthor starting a media company to compete with the Daily Planet, in which Lois Lane leaves the Daily Planet to go undercover at Luthor's company, in which Lois Lane starts to truly believe that Luthor has changed his ways and is not a criminal mastermind anymore. All the way to the end where you have flying saucers and torpedoes with this cartoon-esque visual effects. So the plot is gimmicky and has a lot of outrageous moments. However, in the vein of the serials that I have seen, at least it keeps you entertained and it gives it more of a modern, dynamic pacing, even if it's more of a low-hanging fruit version of a modern dynamic pacing. Now let's talk about the title character and villain of this serial, Atom Man. Atom Man is an alter ego of Luthor. It's a way for him to keep up his villainous ways. As in the public eye, he's trying to be this rehabilitated, honorable business owner. However, this business owner side of things, you only get like a couple of chapters that kind of explore it, where Lois Lane is undercover at the business. But other than that, even though they did kind of try to add depth and not just have him be a generic mad scientist, in the end, in their execution, that's pretty much all you get, because they didn't really explore that other side. But they didn't really need to, because that's what Lex Luthor was at this point in time. I'll be honest, it kind of feels like Atom Man as an alter ego only exists because they needed to put a name on the title that would make viewers believe someone could defeat Superman, because Atom Man feels like this super powerful being. However, in execution, it's just Luthor wearing a costume. So you don't really have that physical battle between Luthor, or you don't have that physical battle between Atom Man and Superman. It's just Superman trying to defeat Luthor the whole time. And so, with that, it does kind of feel pointless to have Atom Man in this. However, I do get enjoyment out of it, because even though the costume itself is a leftover costume from a 1945 serial called The Monster and the Ape, however, when I look at it, I see a time-traveling Shockmaster.
They call me the Shockmaster.
I told you. Oh, God.
Now, the flying sequences in the 1948 serial were one of its more controversial and divisive elements. I enjoyed them. However, a lot of people at the time were disappointed by them. However, they kind of try to rectify that here. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, in the 1948 one, all of the flying sequences were cartoons. And in this one, you still get a lot of cartoons when it's more of the dynamic flying and fast-paced flying. However, when you do get close-ups when he's flying of essentially Kirk Alyn standing up with his arms in the air with a camera pointed sideways, and there's a cyclorama behind him that is depicting cloud pictures. While on a technical level, I do think it's technically an improvement because you do get some live action flying in there. However, when I'm watching it, it feels very jarring when you have this cartoon, Fleischer cartoon, doing all these dynamic movements, and then it cuts to like a close-up of Kirk Alyn in front of a bunch of clouds. And it feels jarring and cheesy. And at the time, I don't know how it would have been perceived. But in retrospect, I kind of just prefer them going full-blown with the cartoons like they did in the first one, whereas trying to mix it up here, it just kind of felt jarring. Atom Man vs. Superman overall is a classic old-fashioned story of Superman versus mad scientist Lex Luthor. And honestly, I know I've talked a little crap about it and how dated it is. However, I still think it holds up better than a lot of serials from this time period. However, it is still a step down from the 1948 serial, in my opinion. I would give it a flat line. There's a lot of fun to be had in the sense that it does feel like a fun live-action cartoon. However, the plot does get lost, and it is fairly dated. So I can only recommend this to the most diehard Superman fans out there. However, if you are one of those diehard Superman fans and want to view this, you can buy the collection of serials alongside the 1948 one. They're pretty much always sold together. And so that means this is still available on Apple TV to purchase and Amazon to purchase. And you can buy a made-on-demand DVD as well. Thanks for watching this video on Atom Man vs. Superman from 1950. And if you want to join the Summer of Superman and hear me talk about the next movie, which is Superman and the Mole Men, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button as well. And leave your comments on Atom Man vs. Superman in the comment section down below. And always, stay super.